who, managing the overall household, were most aware of what was needed and what could be traded. This practice led to the formation of support networks which tied the communities together and could be relied upon in times of need. However, with the introduction of commercial farming and the emergence of a free, independent and property-owning class of farmers, the social structures regulating trade and eventually society became more male-dominated. A trend that increased through the interwar years, manifesting a gender-based division of labor, which reduced farm women more and more to subordinate roles and restricted them to farm space, particularly the house. Consequently, women were excluded from property ownership, the rule of law, and public offices. As American anthropologist Janet Casey writes, farm women who self-identified as producers, as well as consumers, and who often worked in barn or the fields, as well as the kitchens, were marginalized by a new bourgeois investment in separate spheres for the sexes. As a consequence, women were forced to use different means of self-organization and maintaining networks that ensured at least some degree of independence and escape from absolute rule by male power. In the early 20th century, and again the Republic, a few farm women made the attempt to formalize such networks by founding small rural women's associations, which were often subsections to larger male-run academies. These first attempts were quickly undercut by the Nazi regime, which considered the independent spirit of these women an obstacle to the ideological alignment. However, these networks were never fully taken over and retained their original purpose. Away from the indoctrination by the regime, giving both strengths and the necessary support to the farm women throughout the war and especially the post-conflict period. Once the first chaos of these post-war years was resolved, the Allied forces had not only become well aware of the women's ability to organize themselves and their communities, they also helped to re-establish them in a provision in the Marshall Plan. With rural women often being the only capable labor force left, the American and British forces quickly spun up programs that educated farm women in the usage of modern machinery and agricultural techniques. And more than that, they made the educational outreach programs a priority in the immediate after-war years, seeing that rural women's organizations would also be the means by which one could cultivate a democratic sensibility and understanding of the rule of law. After all, women are the prime carriers of education for the next generation. And by creating democratic and non-partisan organizations, the Allied forces hoped to return the rural women's movement into the first line of defense against extremism and national tendencies. The establishment of a functional and resilient civil society, the Allies had realized, was particularly important in regions of the country that were not as closely connected and thus controlled by the centers of political power. To achieve that, they had to use the soft powers of community leaders who would carry the message without being rejected as agents of foreign governments. Contrary to common and, if I may say, wildly romantic ideas, that there is a natural female tendency to conflict resolution and peace building, the Allies, whether that was the result of an intense thought process or not, realized that the women's cultural and social role will put them at an advantage in laying the foundations for such a society. This emphasis on education and social representation remains a central element in the modern Rural Women's Association. However, things did not go so well for the farm women caught behind the Iron Curtain. As the Soviet Union dismantled the farming system and founded gigantic food corporations, female farmers were not only bereft of their properties, but also of their status as independent managers. Much as the men, they were reduced to the status of laborers hired by a socialist state. Their networks, yet again, an obstacle and dangerous boulder against the ideological alignment. As you can probably imagine, this did not go down so well with a group of people that had just single-handedly ensured the survival of their families and communities. As a consequence, the networks of farm women did not dissolve, but rather returned to the hidden sphere of black markets and backyard meetings. I don't have the time to go into much detail here, but the means by which farm women undermined and sabotaged the socialist system are well documented. Retaining their spirit of defiance through 40 years of socialist rule, the rural women of Eastern Germany almost immediately refounded their rural women's organizations after reunification. That's talking about resilience, right? The empowerment they received by joining in the 1990s already well-established German Association of Rural Women in West Germany can be felt until today, as they remain amongst the most active civil rights groups, bringing forth not only members of parliament, but also by engaging and lobbying for environmental causes and rural development. One of their most ardent programs also reflects the original idea of forming a female line of defense against extremism. By training their members as ambassadors of democracy, which speak up against growing nationalistic tendencies and right-wing extremism, again on the rise in rural parts in Germany. They talk in schools, sports associations, and even city councils. Now, one question burning on your mind might be, how does that relate to contemporary peace building, or the situation in countries less developed than Germany? That is a fair question, but one that is easily answered. In her article, Assisting and Empowering Women Facing Natural Disasters, Payal K. Shah examines how Resolution 1325 can be used as a blueprint for a resolution on disaster management, pointing to problems amongst Southeast Asian fishing communities which are not dissimilar to those the women in post-Second World War Germany encountered. Because the fact of the matter is, conflict and war do not change, and neither does their impact on women. Including women in the political discourse and rhetoric is not enough. They need to be made agents of economic and social stability. Such was the case in post-war Germany, as I've just tried to briefly illustrate. As Shaw very convincingly shows, the same type of networks, arising out of women's roles as nurturers, caretakers, and not least household managers, exist across cultures. The very networks are the ones that need to be empowered and included in any form of peace building. One attempt at doing exactly that is the aforementioned program organized by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Development and International Cooperation. The Federal Minister, Kurt Müller, most recently inaugurated a program that takes into account the cultural role and importance of women's organizations, particularly in rural communities. In forming bonds between lady farmers in Ghana and the German Association of Rural Women, this program sets out to establish and strengthen a similar organization in rural regions of Ghana. Keeping in mind the idea of help for self-help, the Ghanaian women will receive trainings in grassroots organization and community outreach that is set apart from the often male-dominated already existing and often corrupt farm organizations. In order to enhance and personalize the program, German female farmers will spend time in Ghana. This illustrates an important element often neglected in peace and community building programs, particularly in regard to gender relations, namely that of meeting at eye level. The program, which is just in its beginnings, is set to better understand how to transmit best practices of communal organization for women all over the world, and to improve the free flow of information and knowledge within the networks of women beyond borders. That's why Germany has undergone major improvements throughout the last decades. It took the government until now to activate one of its most effective elements in long-time peace building, that of rural women.
Thank you. I think that was a perspective that was left out until now. Thank you very much for giving us this part of our lives and our world that very often I believe it's considered beyond our high-level knowledge and experience. It's something that just happens there, that supports us. It has done so through the ages, and yet it's never developed in a subject like that. Do you have comments, questions? Okay. Well,
with microphone, without? Thank you for...
Can you just turn off your microphone?
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. So as a conclusion, you can say this role, economic and social role of women during the war contributed to the positive post-war and today's role of women in society or not? Because when I had some similar things for African states, it's obvious that during the war the women can be family masters. They can take care of everything, but after the war they lost their position. So what is in Germany, for example? Thank you.
Yeah, I briefly mentioned that the Allied forces realized that women were the key, and that was probably given, the 1940s and 50s, that was quite amazing. But I think, particularly in Germany, there were no men. I mean, there was just no one left. It's a little different in modern international conflicts, but pointing to Ferry's disaster example, women after the war don't want to give up those roles necessarily, but they are forced by foreign aid to do so because those foreign aid workers only talk to men. They always only do that because they're like, oh, who's in charge here? And of course, men will be, oh, me. And that's what is in the federal German action plan for the 1325 as well, to more look for alternative leaders to investigate whether women have taken over that kind of specific role and what are their networks. And we're just starting to do that. Like that program with the Rural Women's Association, that is a first. And just implementing it already is really hard because, of course, foreign aid has these kind of systems that work on corruption, that work on male, leadership. So really to just go away from them and find already established female leaders to build them and help them to organize a network is really hard. So I think, yes, it's a really difficult task, but I think it's a very worthy task because that's how you change things. And I think what I heard from here, I think someone mentioned it yesterday, how important it is that there is a female in a uniform as well that is approachable and that can approach someone will also help in that, because if they're there, then the civilian workers can come as well, and they'll be also females. So I guess it's difficult, but it can be done, I guess.
Really interesting. Thank you.
I also have a brief question because this is a pretty interesting topic and a new aspect completely. Because Germany was also engaged in operations in Afghanistan. Sorry, Maria. Thank you. My question is if this perspective was included also in post-ISAF engagement German strategy. Thank you.
They tried, but it wasn't as prominent yet because yes, Germany has the same problem like all other countries. We still believe in fixing things, and we fix them with like male power. And I mean the German Bundeswehr, so our military isn't very female. But there were a couple of women in the ISAF groups just based on that, to bring in women that could enter rooms that others couldn't. But again, you have the Americans that don't respect that at all. So it's really hard, So I think they tried, but post-conflict in such countries and with an overwhelmingly American and thus male perspective of things, it's really hard.
I don't know if I can get you.
Go
I think
the
that
way
I'm
around.
enough loud.
Okay.
Or can thank you very much, and it's wonderful connection between civilian society and military, because at the end of the day, all of us are civilians, because primarily we are living in our countries. We would like to do good things for our states, and it's not important if we are in uniform or not. At the end of the day, I'm mother, I'm a wife, I'm civilians who would like to live in a very development society. So thank you for that connection, but it's something what very much approved my theory that women force is a really good one to use during the crisis, during the problematic situation inside the society or inside the world. And after that situation, we are exactly losing that force. And this is a question that we supposed to discuss about that. How come, speaking about World War I or second one, when the women became a huge power to produce weapons, to take care about complete society, even political roles having during the war, And after the war, after DDR process that we have chance to speak about that, demilitarization, and when we speak how to reintegrate previous warriors in civilian society, we are just losing picture about women. For example, what showed the last decade in 20th centuries, it's that we had a wonderful role of women during the war situation here in Balkan. And if you ask somebody in the Balkan region how many of women were involved in war situation as warriors, or as somebody who take care during the war situation, the rest of civilians, nobody will provide information about that. Even 20 years after the war, no one institute, no one organization, no one international organization has no picture how many of women were involved in that situation and where they are now. Where they are now.